This is my book video review on Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. So, the book Just Mercy is about a young lawyer named Brian Stevenson, whose life mission is to get justice for people who are wrongfully convicted and put on death row or condemned to die in prison, and some cases where their sentence and their punishment was a lot more extreme than the crime they committed. And so he starts a company called EJI that works with incarcerated people who can't afford to pay for a lawyer. So basically their office offers their services for free to these people. And so he tells multiple stories of people who were wrongfully convicted and people whose sentences were a lot more extreme than they should have been. And one of these main stories was about Walter McMillan. So every other chapter we kind of get a deeper dive into Walter's case and story, and we see how he was framed for a crime he didn't even commit. And even though there was evidence that proved that Walter was innocent, like a lot of evidence, they still sentenced him to death. And so along with Walter's story, Stevenson tells about all the other victims who were either wrongfully convicted or had extreme punishments for the crimes they committed, and how their stories kind of impacted Stevenson's life and the way that he and his company had fought for them, and how all these people kind of like gave him the courage to keep on going, even when it got tough. And so he covered larger subgroups such as children, women, the poor, the mentally ill, and African Americans, all which have a higher incarceration rates because they were like a combination of the groups. So like poor women or like African American children, all that kind of stuff. And so overall, Stevenson tells each story, making each person more than their crime, and he kind of reveals that like everyone just needs a little bit of mercy from one another in today's society. So the next question is, what do you like most about the book? So the thing that I liked most about the book is how Brian Stevenson does such a good job of making the incarcerated people like actual people. And so he explains their character, their childhood, their features, and their like kind of mannerisms. And this kind of like helps give a face to the person that he's talking about and gives them a personality. And so it makes them more than the titles and the society gives them, such as like killer, felon, etc. and stuff like that. So one example of this was on page 262 and 263 about this guy named Joe, who has been in prison since he was 13 for a crime, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole, which means basically like he's meant to die in prison. Even though like the crime that he kind of committed wasn't really that extreme level to have that kind of punishment. This is what it reads. The officer eventually relented. Joe seemed to relax when I closed the door. Despite the terrifying start to the visit, he was extremely cheerful. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was talking to a young child. And then another part on 263. Okay, my last question is the most important. He looked up at me briefly with big eyes and smiled, and then he became serious and read his question. Who is your favorite cartoon character? He was beaming when he looked at me. Please tell the truth, I really want to know. I couldn't think of anything and had to force myself to keep smiling. Wow, Joe, I honestly don't know. Can I think about that and get that back to you? I'll write you with my answer. He nodded enthusiastically. And so he's talking about Joe, who was convicted to life in prison as a 13-year-old, and he had spent 18 years in prison at this point when he was talking to him. And so most people kind of viewed Joe as like a killer and just like as like what the crime that he committed. But to be honest, like at the time of his like trial, he was still a child. And even 18 years later, he was still a child at heart. Especially because he had a lot of mental disabilities and extremely horrific events that had happened to him throughout his childhood. And because Brian Stevenson does such a good job at making these people seem like actual people, it really like kind of upsets me to know how the United States like justice system kind of just like carelessly like put them into jail, and like not with like these really long sentences or even like sentencing them to death, like, and not really like looking deep into the case and like figuring out that he does have mental health issues. So like that'd be like the reason that for this happening, and that he shouldn't have to spend his whole life in prison because of it, and that he should be getting the help that he needs. Okay, so the next question is, what are two of your favorite passages? So one of them is on page 202. Oh wait, I've got to tell you something else. Listen, I did something I probably wasn't supposed to do, but I want you to know about it. On the trip back down here after court on that last day, well, I know how Avery is, you know. Well, anyway, I just want you to know that I took an exit off the interstate and on the way back, and well, I took him to a Wendy's and I bought him a chocolate milkshake. I stared at him incredulously, and he broke into a chuckle. Then he locked me inside the room. I was so stunned by what the officer said, I didn't hear the other officer bringing Avery into the room. When I realized Avery was already in the room, I turned and greeted him. When he didn't say anything, I was a little alarmed. Are you okay? Yes, sir, I'm fine. Are you okay? He asked. Yes, Avery, I'm doing really well. I waited for our ritual to begin. When he didn't say anything, I figured I'd just play my part. Look, I tried to bring you chocolate milkshake, but they wouldn't. Avery cut me off. Oh, I got a milkshake. I'm okay now. As I began discussing the hearing, he grinned. We talked for an hour before I had to see another client. Avery never again asked me for a chocolate milkshake. We won a new trial for him and ultimately got him off death row and into a facility where he could receive mental health treatment. I never saw the officer again. Someone told me he quit not long after the last time I saw him. So the reason I really like this passage is because the officer in the story kind of started off as someone that I personally didn't like. He's very rude to Brian Stevenson as he came in to have visits with Avery, one of his clients, and low-key kind of racist towards him. But in this passage, we can see this was after Avery's court case had taken place, and we can see where Avery was put into a lot of bad foster homes. And so the guard kind of softens up because he was at the trial and he had a really bad experience with the foster care system too. And he kind of realized that he didn't need to be so angry at people of what happened to him. And so his way of softening up, he went and got Avery that chocolate milkshake that he'd been asking for months. And eventually Avery did get off death row, and this is just kind of one of those sweet stories that had a happy ending and shows that not all people that are put in prison have sad endings, but they can have a second chance, and that people can change and be better than they were before. Okay, and then the second passage is on page 289. We are all broken by something. We all have hurt someone and have been hurt. We all share the condition of brokenness, even if our brokenness is not equivalent. I desperately wanted mercy for Jimmy Dill and would have done anything to create justice for him, but I couldn't pretend that his struggle was disconnected from my own. The ways in which I have been hurt and have hurt others are different from the ways Jimmy Dill suffered and caused suffering, but our shared brokenness connected us. Paul Farmer, the renowned physician who spent his life trying to cure the world's sickest and poorest people, once quoted me something that the writer Thomas Merton said. We are bodies of broken bones. I guess I'd always known, but never fully considered that being broken is what makes us human. We all have our reasons. Sometimes we're fractured by the choices we make. Sometimes we're shattered by things we would have never have chosen. But our brokenness is also the source of our common humanity, the basis for our shared search for comfort, meaning, and healing. Our shared vulnerability and imperfection nurtures and sustains our capacity for compassion. And so the reason I really like this passage is because it does truly represent humanity in a way that I hadn't really thought of before. It kind of puts everyone on the same page in talking about how our brokenness kind of shapes us and gives us a reason to have mercy on each other, because we know that how our brokenness has affected us. And so we should try to be understanding of others because we are all broken in some way, shape, or form, and we don't really know what other people have been through. And so we should try to be understanding of them. And it just overall it's just a very powerful message, and it shows why Stevenson continues to do what he does, even though he's felt very burnt out and very overwhelmed from his job. And then the last question is, what did the book teach you? So the book taught me the importance of having mercy in other people and not to just jump to conclusions of someone because of their outward appearance or their situation that they are in. So on page 314, Stevenson writes, "Finally, and most important, I told those gathered in the church that Walter had taught me that mercy is just when it is rooted in hopefulness and freely given. Mercy is most empowering, liberating, and transformative when it is directed at the undeserving. The people who haven't earned it, who haven't even sought it, are the most meaningful recipients of our compassion. Walter genuinely forgave the people who unfairly accused him, the people who convicted him, and the people who had judged him unworthy of mercy. And in the end, it was just mercy towards others that allowed him to recover a life worth celebrating, a life that rediscovered the love and freedom that all humans desire, a life that overcame death and condemnation until it was time to die on God's schedule." And so that passage itself kind of really spoke to me because it really showed me the importance of having mercy on people who seem like they don't really deserve it, especially when it comes to people who are in prison and are convicted, because often you don't really get the full story of what happened, especially when you're on the news. You just see the person being convicted as kind of evil in a way. and like that they don't deserve to have mercy on them, and that they just deserve like punishment and stuff like that. So it kind of just reminded that like we all make mistakes, and even though like some people make like worse mistakes than others, we all deserve to have a second chance in some way. And that kind of starts by showing those around us the mercy that we would have wanted to receive. And that is my book video on Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson.